Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time joining us, I really hope that you benefit from what you see in the video today. And if you're returning, thank you very much for coming back for another video. Today we're going to be working again on our Traxxas Slash. We're going to be replacing the servo in our model. This is also works for upgrading the servo, so if you're looking for a more durable replacement or a stronger or even a faster replacement, this video will work for you as well. The tools we're going to need are very simple. You'll just need a 2mm Allen wrench and a 2.5mm Allen wrench, and that will be all the tools that are required. Now I'm going to be using this DeWalt electric screwdriver here. I've shown this in previous videos. These are pretty neat in that if you push the button down, you're only going to get a buzz out of this unit, and as you turn the screwdriver will begin to respond. So this has a gyroscopic technology in there, and if you wanted to add this tool to your toolbox, this is a pretty good one to add. Okay, so the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to remove all of the screws out of our waterproof box. You can see there are 4 screws. There's 2 located here in this cover and 2 more located in this cover. So I'm going to go ahead and take those loose for you now. Now a tip for you going forward, if you put your screws back in the holes that they belong in, this makes things a whole lot easier for you to figure out where your screws go when it comes time to reassemble them. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the servo connector from our receiver. If you'll notice on these Traxxas receivers, there are 2 number 1 slots. It does not matter which one of these slots that plug is plugged into, just so long as they're in a number 1. So we'll unplug this. And in these audio units, you'll find that more often than not, this receiver's kind of in the way. So you can just pop that receiver loose and pull this wire out of here. Now there is a piece of tape that's located on your chassis that's holding your servos in place, your servo connectors rather in place. So this would be a thing you'll have to remove out of the way. Now that our servo cable is disconnected from the receiver, we'll remove these 4 screws that hold the servo in place. But before we do that, we do need to remove the servo saver that's on the servo itself. Now one thing to keep in mind here, if you have the VXL version, you won't have a servo saver. Instead, you'll have a servo arm. The servo saver is required if your bell crank assembly is white, because you don't have a servo saver built in here, and you need this to protect that servo from impact. Now whenever you take this screw loose, it's very important that you hold the servo arm in place. That way you don't strip out your servo when you're getting ready to uninstall or install. Now another tip for you, there is an adapter piece that is on your old servo. You will need to remove this and reinstall it into your new servo when it comes time. There's a little adapter there. Now you'll remove the 4 screws that are holding your servo down. That is it. Your servo is now removed from your vehicle. Now to reinstall your servo, you will place your servo back in your vehicle. There are these little nubs on your chassis here that line up with your servo mount arms so that things will kind of reference in place. If you were paying attention before, the servo connector does come forward out of the vehicle, and you do want to pay attention to that when you get ready to disassemble your car. Now, it's always a good idea to hand tighten these screws. Don't let the tool do that for you. You may strip them out. If you'll notice, I'm using a cross pattern here. This will ensure that things mount flat. This is a good idea, or a good habit rather, to get into when you're installing things. So start with one screw, move to the one that's the furthest away, and then again the furthest away, and the final one that's the furthest away. This will ensure that things just sit flat and don't vibrate loose. We will fish our wire back through here, and sometimes a little tool to help push this in place is a good idea. There we are. And same thing here as well. And finally fish it back under the receiver box. As I mentioned before, this does need to plug into a channel 1 slot. And again, it does not matter which one you plug it into, just so long as it's in a channel 1. Now that all of that is reinstalled, we're going to go ahead and close up this receiver box, as we don't need it anymore. Now you want to make sure that you're not pinching any wires when you close up this box, because that will cause problems for you. So just take time, make sure everything is kind of centered there. And if you remember from before, we put our screws back in our lid here so that we know which screws belong in which holes. It might help if I put the right tool in my driver. And tighten these by hand, don't tighten them with the tool. Same thing with this cover here. Now we want to make sure that we're not going to pinch any of these cables. So again, make sure that everything is well seated in those channels there. And again, a hand tighten with the tool. Now for this last part, we do need to power up our equipment so that that servo will power on and come on into its tension position. So we'll go ahead and install a battery here. Always turn your controller on first and then power on your vehicle. And you'll notice that you can hear the servo turning, but the steering is not operating. So this is where we need to continue our install. Now, if you remember before how I pulled off this little adapter here, if you don't have that adapter, when you go to install this servo arm, the servo arm is too loose on your vehicle. You see it's moving without any effort at all. So you definitely need to reinstall this little adapter here. Okay, so we're going to reinstall that little servo adapter like I mentioned. We're going to grab our controller here and under our steering trim. Now if you'll notice, the steering trim is off a little bit and we want to get this centered up. This way we started everything at 0 and it just makes it nicer to get everything adjusted properly. So now we're going to get our tires here as straight as we can get them. And you're not going to be perfect, so that's just a thing that you have to kind of accept when you're doing this type of install, and that's what your trim is for. So we'll get your vehicle centered. I like using the little the little bell cranks here under the tray, because that way we know that those are centered up. And then we will reinstall our servo arm here. Just like I mentioned before, make sure you're holding onto this arm when you tighten this screw up. And hand tighten. Now, if you'll notice when we look here, the tires, let's see if I can position this better. Now, I don't know if you can see it or not in the video, but the tires are not exactly centered. But that's okay, because that's what our trim is for. So using our trim to properly trim out our steering is a necessary step. Now, I like to focus on these bell cranks, as I mentioned before, not so much the tires, because you can adjust these to get everything properly centered should you need to. Now, also, if you look, you'll see that the trim is a little bit off from 0, but that is okay. That is what this is designed to do. Now that that is all finished up, you'll see that we have steering. So we have successfully installed or successfully replaced our steering servo. Well, guys, that's going to wrap up this video. If you benefited from it in some way, please consider giving me a thumbs up and a subscription. Also, if you want to see these notifications of new videos, make sure you hit that bell and do that for all of your subscriptions. Otherwise, you're not getting those notifications. Well, thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.